We're back today talking Ahsoka. We're on episode 5, I believe. We're kind of chugging along at this pace. I know we're
Yeah,
maybe a
five
little
right now.
behind everybody else, but yeah, the opportunity for us to get together. I know we're short, Mr. Schultz tonight, so hopefully for our next one we'll have him back to talk a little bit. But yeah, 5 episodes in. I guess just past the halfway point. How are we feeling this far into the show so far?
Well, we'll see. I don't know. It's still hard to tell. We're still kind of stuck in a little bit of a slow pace. In some ways we moved a bit, but we'll see. I like the direction we're going, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. I know we've kind of had a sort of totally differing opinions on this show to this point, and it's hard because you have the most recent Star Wars thing to compare it to, which is Mando season 3. You know, you didn't watch Visions at all, did you? So,
No,
yeah, I know neither of us are really big into anime, but so it's almost like you have that to compare it to as the next or the last thing that was out Star Wars wise. And it's easy to say, oh yeah, well this is better. But then we have the burden of proof to be like, okay, but is it just better or is it actually good? And I think that's kind of where we're at right now is it a good show or is it just not as bad as the last one? And I think that's kind of where I'm at with it. You know, where's the distinction between the two, and where do we it, are we going upwards from where we are? Or are we just kind of stagnant in terms of the Star Wars universe? So,
well, I think
interesting things to talk about.
you kind of go down from Andor. So Andor's like best show we've gotten since Mando season 1 and 2.
Well, and arguably the best show we've gotten Star Wars wise, period. I mean, it can be argued.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's different. It's different than Mando season 1 and 2.
I
But
would
definitely
personally
the best
say
since then.
it's the best one, but that's
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I necessarily disagree. I don't know. That may be another topic for another day. But
yeah.
I fall into the trap of comparing it to the most recent thing, which is Mando season 3, which was not good. So, yes, I think it is better than what we're going in the right direction again, right? But as we've proven before, we can get to that mountaintop and then fall pretty dead gum hard. So
yeah, and
fast,
very fast, and it's crazy because it's like you have this constant discussion between, I guess you could say, the warring factions in the fan base, where if you want to use really, aggressive terms in that regard, which I think a lot of it's mostly civil debate, but is this idea of, is Ahsoka helping or saving Star Wars, or is it basically just another, average, Disney Star Wars piece of, conveyor belt content? And I think that's.
I think you're getting a lot of it. I like. Don't get me wrong. As a whole, so far, I like the show, just because I like a lot of the lore behind it. That comes from Dave Filoni. But as far as where we're going, it's definitely a segue, which scares me for how the season's going to end, because I don't think it's going to end satisfactory at all. I think it's going to kind of be disappointing how it ends. And we'll see what that is. But I think, obviously, we're leading up to the Heir to the Empire movie. So,
or an offshoot of it, yeah. So
right, well,
yeah. I think that's a good point to be made, and I guess with that being said, let's talk a little bit about episode 5 and just, I guess, the specifics of that, because I think we get into, where we talked about in our last video, where the way that 4 ends really, we agreed, set up well for the second half of the season. We get the small fleet of rebel ships is sort of stranded out in the in space, which we learned at the beginning of this episode. They're not really stranded. They're just kind of
they're there.
They're there. They're just like, okay, what do we do now? They've escaped
Right.
into this other galaxy with the Eye of Sion and everything, and they're going after to get Thrawn and bring him back. But what do we do? And then on the flip side of that, we had Ahsoka meeting up with Anakin in the World Between Worlds. So it gave us a really good setup. And this was actually, of all the episodes in the show, maybe pending or I would say, except for maybe the first two, which was the beginning of the show. We didn't know what we were going to get with the show at all. And so I was excited to kind of see what they were going to do. But this one was probably the one I was the most excited and hopeful for, because we were getting I thought, what could be a really good dynamic between master and apprentice. And, I was hoping that they would sort of grapple with some of the things that we know that Ahsoka as a character struggled with, in Clone Wars and Rebels, where it's this idea of the guilt for, what happened to Anakin. She feels somewhat responsible for that. And, that's something they visit in the second season of Rebels some. And I think also in maybe some in season 3 and 4. Well, I guess not really, because she's at the end of season 2. She
Right.
disappears to the very end of the last season. So,
right.
But that being said, how do you feel like that aspect of it was handled in terms of the Anakin Ahsoka dynamic in episode 5?
I like what they did. It was really, really cool to me to see the Clone Wars in live action again, even though some of it was somewhat cheesy, a little bit. I get it. You can't recreate whole scenes. It made it look more realistic that they didn't use all the CGI and spend all the money making these fake looking backdrops, that they just kind of covered it all in smoke, which is, that's the fog of war, really, to some degree. And I like what they did with Anakin. So that brings me to my question. So we know Anakin was the chosen one. So do you think, here's what I've seen this thrown around. Do you think that he did take his place as one of the kind of Force gods that we saw in the Mortis arc of the Clone Wars as the one in the middle? Because we saw Anakin's, the light side of Anakin, and we saw the dark side, and those effects in CGI was great. The kind of coming through the fog and kind of shrugging his shoulders, and it's Darth Vader for a second. So it's an interesting question, one that I don't think we'll ever truly get a definitive answer on. We could, I guess.
It's an interesting.
I don't think it would be
sure.
I don't think it would be a live action answer. I think it'd be more like we'd get it in the book or something, and not everybody would know.
Well, I think you have to think of it in terms of, there's a ton of people who have seen the Clone Wars, and for me, besides the original 6 movies and Rogue One, probably, and I don't know, like Clone Wars I grew up on it, and so it's one of my favorite TV shows of all time, just because I'm such a big Star Wars person, and it's some of the best Star Wars content, in my opinion, outside of.
Well, to be honest, it's
6 movies.
It's probably what kept us in Star Wars, because like the 6 movies would not have kept young kids interested in it. So
maybe not. I know I watched those movies over and over again on VCR, so it's like we had them, in unlimited, unlimited rewind. So I don't know. I just think maybe that's too obscure of a episode, and it's sort of out there, even in terms of Clone Wars episodes. That arc is very out there and sort of like off the wall. You don't expect it. It comes out of nowhere. It's a really good arc. It plays on a lot of themes of, the light side, the dark side. That really, I think, is more George Lucas than a lot of the other episodes are because of that aspect. Mm-hmm. I just don't think they'd ever revisit that in live action, because I think casual viewers would be like, what the heck's going on?
That's what I'm saying. I don't think they would necessarily answer it per se, but I think if he's not, what else is he? because to me, the world between worlds, and I don't want to get too into religion or anything, but the world between worlds to me kind of sounds like a purgatory, if nothing else. No, you're not one with the force, and you're not whatever you would be. That's a dark side user to me. So again, he's kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
And he's just there. As when Ahsoka gets there, he's there.
I think I made the purgatory comment maybe in the or something along those lines in the last one, the last videos we did, where that's what it felt like to me, was like this sort of waiting room before you go across, or it's the segue, or as world between worlds, it's like it's that waiting room before you cross over to the next one. But I think we're hitting on something that's maybe, in my opinion, the biggest issue with this episode is. And I understand they're creators, writers, artists, whatever you want to call them. You're not obligated to explain everything to the audience, but you have to explain enough for them to understand and to grasp the concepts that you're trying to convey. And I think the hardest, or maybe the worst thing about this episode to me, or the biggest issue that it faces, is the fact that it doesn't do a very good job of clarifying what exactly the point is it's trying to make with the whole world between worlds, Anakin and Ahsoka arc. Because we've read lots of books, watched movies, TV shows. When you're crafting a story, in order to have a good payoff down the line, you have to build to that payoff through the story construction, the character development. You have to lead the viewer or the reader to that payoff point, and connect all those dots to where when you hit that point, everyone's like, oh yeah, we've been leading to this. We weren't exactly sure what it was going to look like, but because we saw all the signs and we followed the roadmap, we got here. And I think the problem is, and something I think this show's had a problem with as a whole, is that at the beginning, they explain some things, but I think Ahsoka's just so closed off a lot of the episodes. She doesn't say much, and they don't really throw sort of emotional or maybe things in her past sort of issues out there, showing that she's grappling with that. So like they don't allude at all in the first 4 episodes to the fact that Ahsoka struggles with the fact that she was basically trained as a warrior or a soldier and not a true Jedi Knight. And that shaped her. Like, they don't mention that at all through the first 4 episodes. But when you get to this section of the episode, and then you get to the climax of the episode, they're like, oh, so she was struggling with the fact that basically Anakin made her a soldier or a warrior when she's supposed to be a keeper of the peace, which is what the Jedi are supposed to be. And but you look back on a lot of the Rebels material, the Clone Wars material, and even this show, and you're like, I don't see the roadmap to that from that.
Well, and here's my question, not necessarily a rebuttal, but do you think, and Dave wrote all this, right? So he's wrote Clone Wars all the way through this. Do you think Dave views Ahsoka not as a self-contained story, but as all of this as a big story, right? So maybe he thinks, oh, well, this may be the Ahsoka TV show, but I don't have to explain what this world what the world between worlds is. 2,
I don't think it's necessary for him to explain the world between worlds necessarily in a totality sense. Like, we have to know everything about what's going on. I don't think that. I think the mystery behind that, kind of like, we still don't know where Yoda's species comes from, and I don't really have a desire to know. Most people didn't have a desire to learn about Han Solo's background. He's sort of the mysterious rogue. People didn't really want to have answers to all those questions. We got some pretty poor answers in the movie, but it's just one of those things, like, certain questions, I don't need them to be answered. And I think that's a common misconception with a lot of people that might say about, Star Wars fans are a fan of a franchise in general, where they're like, oh, well, you're just not satisfied unless they explain everything. And I'm saying it's not that they don't explain everything. It's that they don't explain hardly anything at all. And so And I've heard some people say, well, they just want to leave it up to the interpretation of the viewer. And I'm like, you can't leave the entire episode up to the interpretation of the viewer, because there is a overarching story here. And also, if you want to have emotional character payoffs, you have to help the viewer to understand the message you're trying to convey. And my issue with the episode mainly was I felt like, based on the background information we had from Rebels and Clone Wars, that she needed some sort of guilt resolution from feeling responsible for Anakin. And I would have much rather Anakin say, Ahsoka, you need to let go, instead of saying live or die. And I'm like, well, why does she, like, when does she ever wanted to die? Like, where did that come from?
Well, I think that comes from, like you were saying, like she doesn't show much emotion. She's just kind of there. She doesn't talk a whole lot. She's kind of lethargic in a lot of ways. And at this point, I think that, like, yes, she has conviction to know, yes, I should stop Thrawn from coming back, and yes, I need to do this, and yes, I need to do that. But I think she was missing. I think his point is that, like, hey, you're missing true conviction, right? Like, yeah, you should do these things, but like the reason Balin Skull beat you, and the reason you're here is because you lack enough conviction. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
No, I get what you're saying.
And I think that's what he means by that. I don't think necessarily, I'm not disagreeing with you, and I get what you're saying. I just, that one point is just kind of, I think
you're just
that's trying to get
an opposite point of view to that.
Right. Well, I don't know about opposite.
Well, you're giving me what you think is the explanation
Right.
for that, and that's fine. Like I don't
Right.
I don't necessarily have an issue with that. I think the issue is just that it doesn't make a lot of sense in the context of the show, because you're like, they haven't really explored any of that in the show at all. So you're like,
not this show, no,
or not really any of the other ones.
Well, and they've explored that she has the guilt, not necessarily any resolution.
But
to
the
it.
guilt of feeling responsible for Anakin, I'm talking about, they don't ever allude to the fact that maybe she's suicidal, or she just lacks the will to live. Kind of like Padme, when Anakin basically turned on her, they said, which is the reason she's dying is because she's lost the will to live. And so they've never alluded to that being a thing. And Ahsoka's character has always been a very strong-willed character, to the point where you don't ever see her is in that sort of state. Not saying she can't ever be, but I think it would have been a simpler thing to just say, Ahsoka, you need to let go. And it's all about her letting go of the guilt, letting go of, the special circumstances she was trained under, and understanding, like, those things are past, but you can still choose to do the right thing now and to help your friends. And
right.
I think that would have been a clearer message, if that makes sense. And I think I just left that episode going, and I told you this, I think I shot you a text shortly after I watched it, and I was like,
they don't explain anything.
No, I said that whole World Between Worlds stuff made zero sense. Like, I was like, I said, I've been racking my brain, and I'm still trying to figure out what kind of point they were conveying there. And I mean, I could, like you said, I could do a little bit of thinking on it and come to some conclusion. But the fact that there isn't a clear one to me was just like, okay, well, that was something,
Maybe that's the idea, and hey, time of this recording, there's still episodes to be seen, so they may come out and say it. I think the runtime on the last episode is 46 minutes without subtitles, so we'll see.
Short. Yeah, we need a Robert Downey. We need an Iron Man. Not a great plan right about now, just to explain that whole episode, because it was like.
Well, and I think it was somebody mentioned that it was that whole episode pretty much was just fan service. To some degree, I'm sure, but you know what? I like fan service every once in a while.
Oh, yeah, if it's done correctly. But I think fan service is also kind of a vague term, because most people would say fan service is just like unadulterated, like shameless, you you're just trying to feed the fans with nostalgia, basically.
Well,
And
part of it.
and that's
Part of
okay.
it.
And I think there's ways to do it that is fine. But I think
Yeah.
there is a tipping point there, and it's like the way they do Luke in season 2 of Mando. I think that's a example of good fan service that makes sense within the context of what's going on. But I think the other thing with this episode was, and I think I made this comment too to you. He's like, if you take out the world between worlds, and just to say this here to clarify, I thought Hayden Christensen was good in the episode. Like I thought what he was given
Yeah.
to work with,
And I thought
did a good job.
the actor that played Jason Sindula did a good job. I thought
Yeah, yeah.
I thought he was good. I think he's been good the whole time, but I mean this one's kind of had more of him in it than any of them. So.
Well, I think so. I felt like they could have spent the entire episode in the world between worlds and really fleshed it out more, like really examined her emotions. They could have flip flopped between a lot of different scenes in her past, and really just had her wrestle with, like, spend times with her and Anakin, just walking and talking about, like, the different things that about their upbringing, and maybe her kind of venting towards him or being angry at him about certain things, and then him talking her through it, and like, because the whole other part of the episode with them searching for Ahsoka was pointless to me. A lot of it was Jason staring at the water, ships flying over water, them standing on cliff, and it's like they're just time wasting at that point.
Well, and yes, I think they overdid the point of, hey, we're looking for Ahsoka. Here's what I don't understand about the episode, that something that I would like to see explained is, what the heck are they doing with Jason? So, like, again, we talked about it last time. He's around somewhere. He's obviously force sensitive. Number one, is Ezra going to train him? Is that where we're going? If Ezra trains him, does that mean Ezra and Jason are with Luke at Luke's temple? Or, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of things. Your time doesn't make sense. So your hard stop of episode 7 and the events that are talked about that happened before episode 7 have to happen at some point. So I just don't understand where we're going with these, with a couple of these characters. Now,
it's a very bleak picture if you look too far ahead for, like, Grogu and Jason, and
it is, but and Grogu, they kind of pulled him out after Mando season 2. It's like, oh, he went with Luke. Oh, he must have died at the temple. They were like, nope, we're pulling our moneymaker back.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, the episode just had some kind of weird moments to me, like you were talking about, and then then them trying to pull Hera back to Coruscant to basically face a court martial. Really, if you think about it, I guess technically it's a defense committee hearing. We find out in episode 6, but and she pretty much is just like, oh, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Yeah, is it that, like, a whole? And I don't like talking about this movie in any regard, but the beginning of The Last Jedi, where, like, Poe's telling your mama jokes, and it's like, we're really telling your mama jokes in Star Wars. Like, this is an all-time low, guys.
It wasn't that low.
No, I'm not comparing this to that. I'm just saying it's like her distracting, like,
can't hear you,
breaking up.
Yeah, so I don't know. That was kind of weird to me. Obviously something just happened. Like,
I feel like it almost suffers from the same problem that a lot of Marvel movies suffer from, is where they don't let serious moments marinate at all, where they're incapable of taking a moment and, like, letting you just watch two characters talk with each other. And this show, I do believe, is for hardcore fans, people who followed Ahsoka's story all the way through the animated stuff till now. And so, like, I'd be all about a 45-minute episode that was just her conversing with Anakin, reliving memories, being a little angry towards each other, or her being angry towards him, and then working through those things, and just some really cool character moments. I'd have been perfectly content with that for an entire 45 minutes of that episode. And then maybe you spend 5 minutes of them searching for Ahsoka and, Jason being the one to find her, and that's fine.
Right.
But
I'm not saying that's not fine. It's just weird the way they went about it.
It's just they spent an inordinate amount of time, probably like 20 minutes of that 40-minute episode.
At
About
least
half
12 to 15. At least 12 to 15.